Hi, everyone. So my name is Will Lighthizer. I'm a senior UX researcher. And today I'm going to be talking about different tips that you can use to maximize your participant recruiting efforts across your studies. So as I was building this presentation, and since I'm relatively new to GitLab, I was trying to think of some of the studies that I've been a part of, and I've just within the 4 months that I've been at GitLab, had a set of challenges recruiting. So as I'm recruiting, I'm asking myself a set of questions, many of which you see there on the slide. So, am I using the right tool to get participants? How do I know if I'm getting the right participants? If you're asking yourself some of those same questions, then this presentation might be useful to you. So the goal of this discussion is really to provide just some high-level general tips, because a lot of these tips, if you put them into use, can really help reduce headaches later on. And what I'm referring to are things like situations where you feel like you need to do additional rounds of recruiting because you're not getting the right data the first time around, or feeling like you're getting participants that don't really match what you're looking for, so you're having to throw them out and kind of start from scratch. We do have a laundry list of different resources internally and externally, so everything that I'm covering today is only scratching the surface. This could be like a semester-long course that I could teach on just this one topic. So feel free to check out those links if you have time. So my first tip, this is kind of an obvious one, knowing your potential users. And this is something that the first presentation touched on. So when you have a set of users that you want to try to obtain through your research, there's a number of different ways that you can try to go about getting them. And first, you want to really understand that deeper representation of the user that you're trying to target. So first, you can discuss with other team members about that target user, kind of going through an exercise to figure out, okay, who's the persona or who's the type of user that uses this type of feature within GitLab. You can also leverage existing data that you might have within Dovetail or user testing. And then we also have information specific to different personas. So if you know that you want to target system admins, we already have personas around that. And then stuff like our doc site also has useful information as well. So this screenshot that I have from the doc site provided me some interesting information around the backup and restore task, which showed me that GitLab, this is for self-managed users only. So this helps me know, okay, these are the people that I need to recruit for the study. So if no information, existing information exists, you can kind of, like I said before, collaborate in different ways through like a mural board, which have been shown a couple times throughout this larger discussion. And then also having like an issue that you build out with other people and have more of an async discussion about who that persona is. Next, my second tip is around finding the right balance with survey screener length. So when I'm talking about screeners, by definition, the questions should screen out anyone who's not qualified to participate in your study. So as you develop those questions, you should really figure out, okay, what questions will really help me get to the target users that I'm trying to get to, and which ones I might not necessarily need to ask, like things that are not necessarily screening anybody out. Those types of questions could be eliminated altogether or just included in your main set of study questions. Also, if you're looking for a very, very specific type of user, of course, you're going to need more questions typically to get that through the screener. Keeping in mind there are some limitations around that in some cases. So for user testing, for example, you can only add up to 6 screener questions for a study. And then in general, the longer a screener survey goes, participants will typically disengage and not complete the full thing. So it's always a balance between trying to find the right amount in order to get the participants that you're looking for. There are some additional workarounds to this though, within some of the tools that we use. So for user testing, for example, it allows filters that I've included a screenshot here where you can specify different things that are known about their panel, and that can help reduce some questions. Respondent also has some of this kind of basic demographic information as well. One thing I would note here is that for something like current role, especially right now, that's being called like the Great Resignation, people are constantly changing jobs, changing careers. So the information that's baked into respondent profiles and user testing profiles might not be 100% up to date. So it might be useful to still ask these questions in a screener. And then we also have our data warehouse that's specific to our SaaS users. So if you want to dig into there, or you can leverage some of that data by talking to someone who has a little bit of SQL knowledge. That's a good place to track a lot of existing data that we have about our customers. My next tip is around asking questions in a way that obscure what kind of users you seek. As you read this tip, you might be thinking, well, don't I want the participants to know who I'm looking for, so it makes it easier? Doesn't that seem a little bit counterintuitive? Well, the one reason I bring this up around obscuring screener questions is that there's a very small percentage of users who use our different platforms, user testing, user Zoom, Respondent, other platforms as well, that are not 100% truthful when they're answering those screener questions. So there are some people trying to gamify those and trying to get the incentive by providing what answers they think the researcher wants to hear. So we have to design questions knowing that to make things a little bit less obvious so that we can really make sure that we're getting the people that we want. So I've got a couple of examples here. Some of these are things that I've actually seen across different surveys that I've been connected to over the past couple months. Some of these are just ones that I came up with. So one example that I've seen a little bit is, do you use GitLab? This is something very common. A better example to ask that type of question would be to say, which of the following tools do you primarily use for DevOps? And then kind of listing those out. So some of the ways that this example helps a little bit better than do you use GitLab is that the question does not give away the desired answer. So when you read do you use GitLab, you automatically think, well, they're probably going to want somebody with GitLab experience for this type of study. And then for this question, if we limit it to just one answer by saying what tool do you primarily use for DevOps, this allows us to get someone who's going to use it more than all these other tools. Another example is, how familiar are you with GitLab? The way we've worded this and some of the response options that you see underneath are kind of biased, as you saw in the previous question. So we're probably looking for someone who has some familiarity with GitLab. A better way to do this would be to ask, how familiar or unfamiliar are you with GitLab? It doesn't automatically give away that we're trying to look for someone with familiarity, but it provides kind of different ends of that spectrum. So that's a good way to just see, okay, what is my participant group? What's their experience level with GitLab? Because you might be doing a study where you're wanting to get at learnability, so you might want a set of participants that are not as familiar with it. And then you might be doing other studies where you want people that are super familiar with GitLab. And then my final example here is, do you have experience with merge requests? Yes or no. So this is kind of similar to the first question. Another way that we could get at this is, how often do you submit a merge request? This kind of gets at experience by seeing how often they're doing it. And then we also give them an option to specify that they haven't done this before. So this gives a couple of good examples of ways to improve your existing screener questions. And then my final tip that I'm going to cover here is being skeptical when reviewing data from potential participants. And so since we know that participants in some cases are trying to gamify screeners, it's good to have a keen eye when looking at some of that data that we're getting back from the screeners. So trying to look for inconsistencies or unexpected responses, things that don't really match up based on, what we'd expect to see for that potential participant. So I've included some examples there of things to keep in mind as you're looking through that information. So some of the best practices that you can use when reviewing that data is, examine a participant against the rest of the participants that fit into that target group. So someone who you might be on the fence about. You can also follow up with participants directly in respondent and user testing to just ask a couple of questions to make sure that they are who they say they are. And then you can also look at like their past participation, for instance, to see what types of studies that they've been involved with and how often that they're participating in those. And one final thing to note is, after users participate in studies, make sure to rate them, just so that user testing and respondent and other platforms are giving us higher quality participants by us giving feedback about those people. So that's all that I'm going to cover today. I know we're almost out of time, but I did want to take some time to answer any additional questions.